I wanted to finish addressing one thing which I didn't say in the last part here. This blue, purple, red, white, Yod, He, Vav, He. If the blue is the creation, Yahweh's expression in what he made, because the Yod is the hand of the Creator. If the He is the purple, which is the expression of the Creator in words, the Kaf and Lamed, the Torah, the royal decrees, then the Mem is the wombed expression of the Kaf and Lamed. The wombed expression put into flesh, the Kaf and Lamed. The Mem is the Kaf and Lamed made flesh. Yeshua being the Torah, the Word made flesh. Mem is a womb, and for him to be born of a woman, to be Noon, to jump out and walk the earth. There's a picture in there. But the Mem comes right after the Kaf and Lamed. Which word made flesh? The Torah? The Torah instructions made flesh, manifested in human form? What's the Torah? Well, the Torah is all these letters of the alphabet rightly appropriated to manifest Aleph through Yod, the Creator himself, as justice and righteousness. And if you pick up on these two words, justice and righteousness, the word justice or right ruling is mishpat, mem, shin, pei, tet, and zadik or zadikah, which is righteousness, like the letter zadi, same word, which means righteousness or doing philanthropic good deeds to one another. So if the Vav is the Memnoon of Yod, or Yod, the Creator manifesting himself as one who is memmed, and then nooning, which is life moving about, what's the second He? Well, when I said it lines up with the Samikai and Pei, Shema, Shomer, together one, it's white because the white linen always is a picture of the righteous works of the saints. The righteous works are Zadikah, doing what he said to do. So the white is us doing what the Messiah, Yeshua, said to do, and he himself was doing what the Kaf and Lamed said to do, which is the verbal expression of Yod, the Creator. So if you look at Yod, He, Vav, He in that sense, and we could go on and on about that, but you should talk about it amidst yourselves, ponder and think and meditate on these things. I want to show you some more things about this letter Mem. We'll get into it later on another occasion, maybe between the Nun and the Samech, perhaps. But I want to show you about these Sophit letters. There's 5 letters in Hebrew that are called Sophit letters, which means if you hear this word as Adam, if you wrote this in modern Hebrew, it would be, Aleph kind of looks like an X shape, the modern Aleph, Dalet, and then this Mem would be drawn in this shape with a closed end. Whenever it ends up at the end of the letter, it's called a Sophit, and it's drawn like that. But if this letter Mem, like Emet, here's the Aleph, Mem, and then the letter Tav, it's drawn differently. I almost couldn't remember the modern letter Tav there for a second. The letter Mem is drawn differently when it's at the end. The 5 letters which are drawn differently are on this chart right through here. The Kaf, the Mem, the Nun, the Pei, and the Zadi. When they appear at the end of a word, they're drawn differently. But in Paleo, that's not the case. One other thing I wanted to mention, just to bring you up to speed about the letters, if you're reading a Tanakh, this is published by Art Scroll, it's called the Stone Edition. The rendering of the letters off to the side When they get to the yod, which is number 10, the number 11 is yod aleph. That's like 10 plus 1. Yod bet is 10 plus 2. But when you get to the kaf, it's the number 20. Well, we were talking about the letter kaf is the 11th letter. But when you're rendering the gematria, as in when Jamie was talking about it earlier, or when you're counting according to base 10, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30. The letter mem would be number 40. The letter nun is number 50. 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Again, there's different ways to count. So we could look at this letter nun that's coming up and say, well, wait a minute. If the lamed is number 12, mem is number 13, nun is number 14. It's the 14th letter, but if you read in the Tanakh, you'll only see the number 14 as yod dalet, 10 and 4. And if you're counting gematria values, nun is 50. Well, the interesting thing about Shavuot, Pentecost, mem is counting the 7 sevens. It's like an incubation period, a pregnancy term. You're counting the 49 and then nun, birthing 50. Is it coincidental that nun is equal to 50? Birthing 50, nun? Nun it also means a fish, and it's that which jumps out of the water. So the nun is drawn like a lightning bolt, like a zigzag, like a grasshopper's leg, or that thing which is hunched up that can jump. And it's number 50, which jumps out of, by itself, not part of the 49. You see, the 7 sevens you're supposed to count, which is the commandment of Shavuot, count for yourselves 7 sevens. And then the command of gathering is the 50th day. The 50th day is not part of the counting. It's outside of the counting. There's a picture here. So, if you're looking back at the festivals, other than Todd Bennett, virtually every reckoning of the festivals I've found, there might be some other people, but virtually every reckoning of the festivals I've found says that Shavuot is 2 festivals. There's the first day, which is called the wave offering, where they'll cut the sheaf called the omer, and the priest will wave it. That's a festival. And then 50 days later, they have what they call Bikurim, or the 50th day, and that's a festival. So they say, the people who reckon the festivals, who count the festivals, there's 7 festivals, they'll say, well, this is 2 festivals. Well, if you count this one festival, remember this festival lines up with the mem and the nun. That's why I'm going about this 3rd festival, equal to the 3rd day. Like the day that he separated the water from the earth and spoke plant life into the earth, planting a seed, and what does the seed do? It gestates, it develops, it incubates in the soil with warmth, and then it sprouts. And when it sprouts, of course, the festival of counting is not the sprout. It's like it's the summer harvest, or the early, you might call it the spring harvest. You let it harvest, and then the 50th day you cut the wheat, I guess it was, that was growing, and then you turn it into loaves, and then you wave the loaves. They're pictures, they're types. You can't lock them in, but they're pictures. What I'm saying is that it's this process of the 49 days and then the 50th. It's speaking seed into the ground, which develops until it sprouts out of the earth. A baby is conceived. It grows and develops in the dark, in the mystery, and then it's born. It sprouts out. Well, when it's born, it's just a small thing. It hasn't yet developed on its own yet. So after the nun sprouts out, it develops on its own, which gets into what comes after the nun. These letters. The nun developing on its own recognizance is one of the aspects of the nun. There's another way to regard these letters. Actually, there's a number of ways to regard these letters, and because of a limitation of time, again, I can only address a few matters. I'm not trying to confuse you, but there's so many different things we could say about each one of these letters. The thing about the Sophite letters we'll get to hopefully before we're done today, but there's 5 Sophite letters and they come at the end. I believe, this is my own take on the matter, that the Sophite letters are their own message. Now, I've not heard anybody else talk about that, but if I'm going to sit here and say, well, who came up with the Sophite letters? Did Daniel? I project, my hypothesis is, to reiterate what we said in the very beginning, you go back to Daniel 12:4, and this is for the sake of Oscar here, right? He hasn't been in any of these classes. I believe that the angel Gabriel who said to Daniel, hide the words and seal the book until the time of Kufzadi, that Daniel changed these letters from the Paleo to the modern. And if it's until a certain time, and if this is that occasion, then what we're doing is seeing things that maybe Daniel knew, that Daniel hid, and if this is the pertinent occasion, then we're trying to find what these things were that was hidden. There was no Sophite letters in the Paleo. So whether Daniel came up with the Sophite letters or somebody else came up with the Sophite letters, one might sit there and say, oh, well, they're just there. Or you can look at them and say, why are they there? So one of my ponderings was to look at these 5 Sophite letters and say, now what might they mean? Why these 5? So you've got the Kaf, you've got the Mem, you've got the Nun Pe Zadi. Now, if you took these in a class by themselves, if you don't know what the letters mean, you can't do anything with them. So you might say, well, this is kind of the advanced course. But if you look at the Kaf as meaning like, and it also means you, and if Mem is you might say the female kind of thing of the wombing of bringing forth, and Nun has to do with life, Pe has to do with fellowship, and Zadi has to do with the hope set before us. And if you could say, well, Aleph Mem Nun has to do with amen, or so be it, which is doing what you were told to do, which has to do with the Torah. If the Kaf has to do with the Torah instructions, the interesting thing about all these letters is that 4 of the 5 have a similar aspect, and one of them is different. The one of them that's different happens to be the Mem. We're discussing the letter Mem. Here's what it is. The letter Kaf in modern is shaped like this, and the Sophite has a bottom dropped out of it. It's like, picture a trapdoor opening up unto eternity. You know, we might think, oh, if you dig down deep enough, you'll hit China. But what if you just open the door and you go to eternity? Okay, the letter Nun. Here's the modern letter Nun, and the Sophite, the bottom drops open to eternity. The letter Pe is shaped like this, and the Sophite opens up to eternity. The letter Zadi is shaped like this, and the Sophite opens up to eternity, you might say. But the Mem is different. The Mem is, here's the open one, and the Sophite is, it's closed. Why is the Mem not open like the trapdoor opening unto eternity, you might say? And in thinking about it, I was trying to think, what's the distinction between the New Testament and the Old Testament? Really, what's the difference? You read all through the Old Testament and you see very little talk about eternity. But the New Testament talks about eternity all the time. How do you get to eternity? You got to be either saved or born again, maybe both, right? How else do you get into the kingdom of eternity? But if you read the Old Testament, it doesn't so much talk about getting into eternity. In fact, it's not even hardly mentioned, other than David says, well, you're not going to leave your chosen one to see corruption. Not very much more mentioned. I think maybe Job mentions it. And other than that, it's all about how are you living this life. But you get to the New Testament, all of a sudden, it's all about eternity. Why the distinction? In fact, you read the New Testament. In fact, a friend of mine, just to show you the problem, a friend of mine was doing some work for a Christian. I'm not trying to slam Christianity or Christians. I'm just trying to show you a problem. A friend of mine who was not a believer was doing some work for a Christian. And the guy decided not to pay him. He's going to rip him off. And my friend says to him, hey, doesn't your own religion tell you you're supposed to pay your workers? And he says, so I'll ask for forgiveness. I'm still not going to pay you. It's like, what? It was an outrage. There was a moral outrage from a heathen at the audacity of this Christian who say, I'm not going to do what's just and righteous But I have a carte blanche excuse. I'm just going to ask for forgiveness, and I'm going to defile what's right to you. Is that right? Is that accurate? Is that true? Is that what the scriptures say, really? Now we're getting into the mem. We're getting into a hidden mystery. Some toes might get stepped on here, but I'm going to mention a few things because this is memming. We're discussing the mem. What might these letters mean? And in thinking about it, it's like, if you read the New Testament, what it says is, well, let's go back. Let's read the alphabet. If the alphabet speaks of a message to the creation from the Creator, and as my hypothesis is, the alphabet is the communication, is the message. If you know what the letters of the alphabet mean, it is the secret, mysterious message that the Creator gave to His creation. And that if we can reveal, if we can see what's been hidden in the message of the alphabet itself, we'll see the heart, not just the heart, but the face of the Creator revealed. Why the face? Because Yahweh says more than once, because you have rejected my words, I'm going to hide my face from you and see what will become of you. What's His face? If you spell the word face, it's Pei, Nun, Yod, Paneh. Quite often actually Panim, it's written in the plural. Pei is a mouth, and Nun is a living thing which jumps out of. Remember, the Nun jumps out of the mem, which is the womb, so it's like the baby being born. Well, what jumps out of your mouth? Words. Yod is the hand that goes to work. So the word Paneh, which is face, is literally pictographically, hieroglyphically put together as words, which is living things which jump out of your mouth and cause things to happen. So last week we were talking about the letter Lamed, meaning the authority to speak and cause things to happen. And if you speak things because you hear that, if you say these words, things can happen, it becomes sorcery, or it becomes like the 7 sons of Shiva who said, in the name of Jesus that Paul talks about, and they tried to kick out the demon says, I know who Jesus and Paul are, actually Yeshua and Shaul are, but who are you? They had no authority. They simply were rascaling or running off trying to steal the words and put them to use. They had no authority, and it backfired because we have a sworn oath, a Shiva, 7. The sworn oath of Yahweh is, these words are not just firecrackers you can light off and stick them under somebody to go, and scare them. No, these words are life and death. And if you misappropriate the use of these words, you literally have hell to pay, or you have heaven to gain, or you have the appropriation of the scepter, the staff of righteousness, as Israel, as Yahweh's chosen to walk the face of the earth and rule as His emissary, the same way Yeshua did, with His full authority backing it up. You can make for yourself a little star and put on a uniform and pretend you're a cop, but if you don't have the authority of the state backing it up, you're going to get in big trouble. Not only is it illegal, nobody has to do what you say, and you can just pretend all you want. You're just playing dress up. This is not playing dress up. This is reckoning with the authority of the kingdom, not the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of the Creator of the heavens. This is serious business. What is this talking about? Yeshua was the one who was mem-nooned. He was memmed through a womb to walk the face of the earth. So as the letter mem in the standard alphabet is an open womb. So it's kind of a picture of saying, these are the concerns for those who walk the earth. But the final letters, the Sophite letters, has a closed mem. And Yeshua even said to Nicodemus, it's like this has nothing, those who were born of the flesh are of the flesh, but this has to do with being born of the Spirit, not of the will of the flesh, not through a mortal mem. Well, a closed mem, could these final Sophite letters then be speaking of the spiritual realm, or being born or being active unto the dynamic of the unseen immaterial world, which is only accessed through keeping the regards of the Torah, and the mem, which is the nurturing his commandments, Kaf and Lamed, unto eternal life, unto the fellowship of the Kahal, the assembly, unto the eternal hope set before us. Well, now that speaks of the New Testament. But what about all the other letters? They're all the same. In other words, if you take the New Testament and you eradicate the other letters, what do you have? Is the New Testament accurate? Or if those who preach the New Testament, are they accurate if they say that all the other things have been done away with? You see, the only thing that's changed is on these 5 Sophite letters is that there's an eternal aspect to these 5 things. There's an eternal aspect to the Torah. There's an eternal aspect to say, how do you get there? There's an eternal aspect of life that's imparted, an eternal aspect of the fellowship of the brethren. There's an eternal aspect of the scepter of righteousness and the hope set before us to be conformed to the image of the one sent, epitomized as the iconic archetype of the Torah made flesh, which is Yeshua HaMashiach. With that regard, I can now read the New Testament in a different light. But if somebody says to me, you have to be born again, where does this concept of born again fit the alphabet? Well, if it's anything, it's at the Mem, but that's at a place of baptism, and that's after you learn the instructions, and that's after you've agreed to go along with the Kaf and Lamed. You see, if you sequence the letters of the alphabet, you don't get to the Mem until you've Lameded the Kaf. And so we're kind of doing this Hebrewish thing. In the song, Kaf, which is Torah, Torah, Torah. You know, I said that for a reason. Does anybody remember what the Japanese said as they were about to invade and bomb Pearl Harbor? Torah, Torah, Torah. Gee, now that's Japanese, and I don't know what it means, although I heard that somebody said, well, they just said that because that was just this secret code. But one might say, let's just play into it and say, because you did not regard the Torah, this is what's going to happen. You will be bombed and devastated and throw the world into war. Could be. Even if they didn't know they were doing it, was Yahweh doing that? Did Yahweh have a hand in that? My point is, if you don't regard the Torah by lameding, now I'm using the word lamed, which means teach and learn, lameding, so that from mem, you see now here, if you look into the red dictionary under mem, and just to make it easy for those who, page 308, every letter does this. They start off, they show mem, and they said the 13th letter, ancient resembling waves of water. Then it says the letter mem with a box next to it, and as we've said before, the box means the rest of the word. It's showing you what happens when you use the mem as a prefix. And it means to denote places. It also means from or of. As a suffix, it says the word by day from the word day, so by day or of the day. Anyway, the point is, if you put the letter mem in front of something, it means of or from. What is a womb? It's where you're of or from. So if you use the word makom, we mentioned the other day that the word kumi means arise. And the word kom, which is kuf, which is like a pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, that which rose up above the Ark of the Covenant, kuf vav mem, kom. Kumi, which would be arise, but nevertheless, kom is to be standing or arising. But if you put a mem in front of it, makom, it's the place that you stand. Well, you could say, well, the place you stand is a concept, but it's also the feet, the ground under your feet. The ground under your feet is the place that you stand. That's a makom. So the mikdash, the word kadosh, kuf dalet shin, is set apart. It's translated as holy, or it's the distinct. It's the temple, mount. But mikdash is the place of the kadosh. So sometimes you'll see the word mikdash is literally written as the temple, because it's the kadosh place. The reason for doing this is that if you try to spell a word and you say, well, okay, I'm looking up this word mikdash, how do I do that? Well, if you can see that this word kadosh is the root of it, and this mem is a prefix, meaning the place where that happens, you can start to dissect the words, and now you're starting to affect. It's like taking chemistry. And if somebody says, well, water is water and that's different than air, and you go, okay, well, there's a big difference between water and air, but why does water turn into air and then turn back into water? It's H2O. It's got hydrogen and oxygen. And if you understand chemistry and you can play with them, you can put 2 or 3 or 1 molecule of oxygen with the water, and you're going to end up with a completely different thing. It'll be extra healthy or extra toxic, carbon monoxide. And anyway, the point is, this is like doing chemistry with the letters. If you understand what the letters mean and how they fit together, if you break them apart and put them back together, it's like doing chemistry. It's the same frame of mind. So I'm going to show you a couple types of words that use the mem, just so you get a feeling of it. We mentioned that mem is like a womb. So if you get the word het mem, now remember, het was a fence, but it's not just a fence, it's an enclosure. But mem is a womb, right? So here you now have this enclosure that's a womb. Does anybody know what this word means? Cham? No, chai is life, which is het yod. The interesting thing, I'm not sure if I mentioned this the other day, but when we were doing the letters het and yod, yod as a suffix means my. This word het yod is the word life. And you could say het is a container, or a fence, or a pasture, or the kingdom. And if you put all those concepts together, it's basically saying the Creator's kingdom, or realm, or dominion is that of life. He controls life. Everything's alive where He's at. He's the one who speaks life. He's the one who says it doesn't exist anymore. So it's not just the word life, but it's like, this is my jurisdiction. Interesting way to read it. But this word here, chem, is the word for warmth. So if you get rahem, it's very similar to Rachel, which is the word Rachel. But rahem has to do with compassion. Tenderly compassionate over your child, you might say. The word lamed mem dalet all has to do with a mode or a model or a medallion. And you might say, well, what do you get points for in this kingdom? For nurturing the lamed instructions. So the warmth that you feel about the instructions is basically what this is all about. The word for gam, if you see the word written gimel mem, remember gimel is a word for camel. And the camel is the animal with the big hump, right? And the four legs and the neck like the gimel, the shape of the gimel. But this big hump is kind of like, well, there's kind of like a picture of the mem, right? And what's the mem? Well, it's a womb, but it's a container. Well, the chet's a container, but the womb is a container. And this word gimel mem means to be heaped up, which is to say also. So if you have this and also that and also something else, you're heaping stuff up, that's the word for gam, or to combine things together. Again, I'm trying to show you these pictures. Reshmem, Rom, where you get the word Romulan. The people in Star Trek did it on purpose, I'm sure. Where you get the word Roman. Rom, it means to be high, great, supreme. Shinmem is the word for name. The interesting thing in Paleo is that the letter Shin is the top half of the name. The other thing about the word for Shin Mem, and again, just to play with some of these different words and break them down a little bit, the word for heavens is Shin Mem, Yod Mem. Well, Yod Mem as a suffix is a plural. Remember, it means ocean. So mem and waters are typically referenced as people or as groups of people. But Shin Mem is also name. So the word Shemayim is the word for heavens, but it also can literally be read as names. Well, the scriptures tell us that he named all the stars, that he put every star in a certain place. And remember, the word Shem doesn't also mean name, but also means place. It also is translated as the word here, and it's translated as the word there, and it's a reputation or a renown. So in other words, each star, each galaxy, each thing that has an aspect of its unique identity technically is a Shem. So to call it the heavens in English misses the point. It's designated entities of peculiar, unique, personal expression. The stars, he knows each one. And you could say, well, how does that play into our future? That's a whole other thing that you can run with, but the idea is there that in Hebrew it's not just heavens, but we just call it, the heavens. The places of the names. If you study the names of the stars, that's a whole other thing. Here, let me show you another word for, just to play off this concept, the word for puma, pe, vav, mem. Well, that's Spanish for the mountain lion, right? Or like a leopard. It means the mouth. Puma literally in Hebrew means mouth. Well, pe means mouth. Peyod, my mouth, but it also means the opening, that which opens. What's a womb? That which opens. For Yeshua, to read the alphabetic expression and say he came through the womb opened and brought forth him. See, there's these pictures. So for me to say, listen, I keep going on about Yeshua being the Mashiach. How can I say that? How can I prove that he's the Mashiach? He's the one identified by the 22 letters. Not the 27, because the 5 Sophites are a different aspect unto eternity, which is its own study, as far as I regard that. But to sit there, if anybody who doesn't believe that Yeshua is not the Mashiach, and if I could sit here and point at these 20 letters and say, where's the proof that he would be born of a woman and walk the earth? I can look at the Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion and say he was sent, Bet, manifested into the form of the universe, Aleph as the intentional plan of the Creator, to come here as the sent one, the emissary, to be slain. But what is this Mem? See, there's 2 different ways to read it. If he was sent to the earth, but Mem comes later, how can I say that Mem has to do with him being sent to the earth? There's different patterns within the system. We don't have time to go into all the different patterns, but there's different patterns within the system. So I could say that if he was put into the tomb, which was Tet, remember Tet is like this big round rock that rolled over the face of the Het, and if Het is an enclosure, then Tet is like this full basket or this round thing. It's like the round stone rolled over in front of the Het, in front of the tomb. And he was then locked in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights before he, Zadi, sprouted like the dead stick, Aaron's rod that budded, sprouted back to life, and Kuf rose up, the ascension. See, I can see these pictures in there. So Mem in that case is a picture of the tomb. But Mem is also a picture of him being born of the flesh. It all depends on how you read it. But again, if we sit there and say, well, what does the Mem have to do with us? I could sit here and say, okay, how do we get born again? How do you get saved? Has anybody ever heard the expression that you're supposed to invite Jesus into your heart? Can anybody tell me where in the Bible that verse is that says that that's what you're supposed to do? It's not there. How could it not be there? That is the pinnacle, that's the essence of the Christian message, is it not? You're supposed to ask Jesus in your heart and go to heaven? Get saved from your sins by asking him into your heart? And yet it's not in the Bible? Well, who came up with it? How did it find its way into our consciousness, into our doctrines, into our theology, if it's not in the Bible? A man came up with it? There's a verse in Jeremiah where we talked about last week where it says, we will come to the end of the earth. The end word, end there, means null or nothing, not. And people will say, we have inherited only empty things in which there is no profit. Where is one who counts? Where is one who suffers? Shekels. Suffers in shekels. Where is one who counts the towers or suffers the gedolim, the big things? The Point is, if we come to say, the next verse says, can a man make Elohim for himself? They are not Elohim. In other words, if we said, we're going to keep Christmas, Easter, and Sunday to the glory of God, and we're going to invite Jesus into our hearts so that we can be saved and live forever, and we can sing beautiful songs, and we can preach wonderful sermons. But you know something? Not a word of it is in the scriptures of Yahweh to his people. And it says in that verse, your heart will muse in dread. And what that means is, you will think about these things that we've inherited and go, you can supplant your favorite expletive here. Oy vey, Batman. You know, Robin used to say certain things to Batman, like, holy blah, 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 Batman. You know, it's like, you know, stick it in there. My point is this. This is not about coming against the Christians or the rabbinical teachings or the Islamic fundamentalists who have a serious concern for the heart. But what it says is, if you invent your own stuff, it is not Elohim. You may feel good, you may sing beautiful songs, but Elohim can be translated as God or the deified things, or its power or strength. And it's like, you can invent anything you want, but if it's not what he said, it's not what Yahweh said. So last week, you know, I'm pounding the scepter of the 10 words, the 12, the authority of the staff with the 10 commandments written on it. These words is what he said. Okay. So what does the mem have to do with being born again? How do you get born again? Yeshua mentioned he's the culprit. He, in John chapter 3, came up with these words about being born again as he was talking to Nicodemus. Sightedmoon, actually. Nun kuf dalet yod mem nun. That's a whole other story that we don't have time for. We're running out of time here. But the point is, what did he say? Let me show you a couple pictures regarding these letters. Let's see if we can find what truth there is in the notion of asking Yeshua into your heart. Where does that come from? Being that it's not a scripture verse. Here you have the hull of a boat. Here's the ribs. Those are kind of like Kaf. Here's a rudder steering the boat. That's like a lamed. Here's the mast. Here's the deck of the boat. Here's the mast. That's kind of like a samek. Here's the water that the boat's swimming in. There's the mem. There's a storm or energy imparted. It's kind of a noon thing. Here's a telescope looking where you're going to go. There's an ayin. In life, the lamed is the same as the mechanism of steering. The kaf, remember, it's the cup shape. It's like his words are what carries us through the waters and the storms. And you could say in the samek is this structure like a sail. The paleosamek even looks like a square-rigged mast. There's another picture here. You've got furrows of a field, like kaf, the lines. You've got the lamed shape as a hoe to plant the seeds underneath the earth, which are memming until they sprout up noon. And once they sprout, Yeshua said, I'm the vine and you're the branches. There's a picture of the samek, and you're supposed to bear fruit on the branches. And the bear fruit is the picture like these bulbs, like the ayin, which that he will inspect the quality of the fruit so that you can eat them. I'm trying to show you there's different pictures in the sequence of the letters. But where's this business of asking him into your heart? If the kaf and the lamed are the instructions, the furrows, what is a mem? A mem is the female form which invites the seed. Whose seed? Yahweh's word. If you were to invite Yahweh, his word, into your heart, And Yeshua is the Word made flesh. You have just asked Yeshua into your heart. But you see, in the Christian New Testament, it loses its bearings, and it becomes its own esoteric doctrine with no foundation. If you go back to the Torah, you'll see that Yahweh gave His Word to His people. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 1 here real quick. This is quite often used as a reason why Yahweh abandoned Israel and did away with the Old Testament and gave us the New Testament where we didn't have to regard any of these things. This is verse 11. Yahweh says, "Why do I need your numerous sacrifices, says Yahweh? I am filled, I'm sated with elevation offerings of rams and the fat of fatlings, the blood of bulls, sheep, and goats. I do not desire. When you come to appear before me, who sought this from your hand to trample my courtyards? Bring your worthless meal offering no longer. It is of incense of abomination to me. As for the new moon and the Sabbath and your calling of convocations, which are the festivals and gatherings, I cannot abide mendacity with solemn assembly." Mendacity, this is the Stone's Tanakh translation. The word mendacity means false and counterfeit. What he's saying is, I cannot endure false counterfeit hearts pretending to do my solemn commanded gatherings. My soul detests your new moons and your appointed times. They have become a burden upon me. I'm weary of bearing them. When you spread your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you were to intensify your prayer, I will not listen. Your hands are replete with blood. Wash yourselves. Mem concept. Wash yourselves. Purify yourselves. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease doing evil. Learn, lamed, learn to do good. Seek justice, that's the word mishpat. Vindicate the victim. Render justice, that's the word mishpat. Often take up the grievance of the widow. Now you hear this word, this next verse quoted quite often, but you don't hear the last half. I'll read it. "Come now, let us reason together, says Yahweh. If your sins are like scarlet, they will become white as snow." The Christians teach this quite often. I remember learning it in elementary school. And it's speaking of the Messiah, right? It doesn't say so here. If they have become as red as crimson, they will become white as wool. See, this next verse is always left off. Verse 19. If you are willing and obey, you will eat the goodness of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword. The mouth of Yahweh has spoken. Let's go over to chapter 3. If you run down to verse 10. Tell each righteous man what is good, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. We talked about before, at the week of the Vav and the Zion, there's this yoke, there's the reciprocation. The Gimel was a boomerang. Dalet is a choice. Hear what he's saying. The righteous man, teach the righteous man the way this stuff works. You will listen to the Kaf and Lamed. You, by listening, will plant these seeds in your heart, and you will eat the fruit of your own deeds. But woe to the wicked person who does evil, for the recompense of his own hands will be dealt to him. Go on down to verse 13. Yahweh stands erect to contend and stands to judge the peoples. Yahweh will enter into judgment with the elders and the officers of his people. This is what he's saying to those who are supposed to be watching over the church, the flock, the kahal, the assembly of those who are trying to come to the truth of these words. You, the leaders, have consumed the vineyard. What you have robbed from the poor man is in your own houses. What has become of you that you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor? The word of Adonai Yahweh Zavot, Master of Legions. If you read through looking for what these mem words mean, you'll find that Yahweh says this. You want to live? Do what I told you to do. But you see, the message that has gone out with the Christian church is, hey, just ask them to forgive you, and you can do anything you dang well please. No, it's more like whatever you damn well please, because if you do what he said not to do, you will be damned to the hell of eternity if you continue to transgress, and you will be damned to the hell of your own manufacture on the face of this earth. But then even David said, why is it that we look at those people who are so wicked and evil and they seem to prosper? And he says, man is like the flower that quickly fades, like the grass which is there in its strength of summer, and then it quickly withers. And the end of the wicked is sure to come on Judgment Day. But if we are told that everything we do is just simply wiped away and forgiven, and we don't ever come back to reckon with the words of this Torah, we are setting up ourselves for a worthless present life and a worthless future. Because if the things we will be judged on is the fruit which is born from the word which is nurtured in our heart with a compassion and a regard for Yahweh's own self, which is the Torah, which Yeshua came to manifest in human form. And if we think it has been done away with and doesn't matter, then we will be weighed according to the scales of it doesn't matter. Empty, worthless, light of no value. And even Yeshua talked about the one that teaches others to regard these things. In Daniel 12 verses 2 and 3, those who teach others to regard the matters will shine like the stars forever, with a place in the heavens, the Shemayim, the names, the places, like the stars forever. But those who teach others to disregard these words and that they have no value, he said, with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Every preacher out there who is telling the people that don't know how to read that these words have been done away with and that they are of no consequence and they do not matter, are themselves going to be held and put into the scales of the same value. Empty, worthless, of no regard and no matter. Now, I'm not saying that they won't be in the kingdom, but the question is, if you look at the alphabetic pattern, when you come into the kingdom, it's not because of the merit of your virtue and of your good deeds. When you come into the kingdom by the Vav Zion, you're in the darkness. Going back to this pattern here. In the darkness, all you see is the distinction between your depravity, your slavery, and the big white glowing fence of the kingdom of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. And if you choose to turn to that kingdom and say, I want that kingdom, you don't know what it is other than it's a hope of a difference than what you experience. Is that being saved? Is that being born again? I don't know what to make of these labels. I'm not trying to evaluate the labels. I'm trying to give us a different vocabulary based on the Hebrew pictures. If we say, we in the darkness look to the one who is lifted up. Yeshua said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. So I hear people talking on the radio about worshiping Yeshua and about he is our Savior and our Redeemer. And yet I read in the Old Testament where Yahweh says, I am Yahweh. I am your, speaking to Israel, who is the Kaf, remember, who is you? Israel, he's speaking to Israel, I am your Savior, Redeemer, Deliverer. Next to me, beside me, there is no other. But we as the Christian model have Yeshua sitting on the right hand of God the Father. What does this mean? I don't know what this means. I can't account for where those doctrines came from. I can't sit here in a few minutes and go back and try to retract or explain 2,000 years of spurious doctrine from people who have been caught lying already. It's not my job to sit here and unravel many lies. It's our job to look at the words of the Scripture and say, what did he say? What did he mean? What will become of us if we keep his words of instruction? What will become of us if we don't keep his words of instruction? And if we don't know what he says because we can't read the language, guess what? You're either going to have to sit there and take my word for it, or you can learn to read. And hopefully this class is teaching you how to learn to read. And if you can't read the words, read the alphabetic pattern. What's the alphabetic pattern? That's the purpose of this chart. It's laid out right here. You who are in the darkness, see the promise of a big white fence, of a kingdom of light, and on it is the flag of the Creator, Yod He Vav He, and simply say, I want in. Once you come in, you're faced with the altar of sacrifice, the coffin, the lamed, the Torah instructions. And, oh yes, there's 613 laws in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament there's something like 1,500. We don't talk about that. We just talk about, we hear words about that burden of the 613. Yeshua boiled them down and said there's basically two. Love Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But you can boil that down and say, how do you love Yahweh? He gave us the 10 Commandments, and he says, know who he is, and if you know who he is, you're not going to have other Elohim, and it's basically recognize him and honor him, acknowledge his identity by the Sabbath day, and his name. Don't pick up his name in vain. If you take up his name and cross it, bring it to void, bring it to nothingness, take up his name and go, yeah, well, whatever. You've now brought it to vanity, brought it to nothingness, and you will be held accountable. You will be brought to nothingness if you take his name to nothingness. So it's basically, how do you take his name to nothingness? By profaning the Sabbath day. How many times does he say it through the Scriptures? If you take an eye for what does he say about the Sabbath day and read through the Scriptures looking for that, you will see what he says about it, and it's very important. What about your neighbor? How do you love your neighbor as yourself? Don't do anything to distress your neighbor. Whatever you do to your neighbor is going to come back on you. It's about that hard. Why do we keep making a big deal about the Sabbath day? Because Yahweh did. For some reason, Sabbath day, when it includes the festivals in Leviticus 23, he boils it all down to saying, your regard of the Shabbat expresses your regard of him and his word, which is his face revealed. And if you say, oh, I love Yeshua, but I can't stand this big ugly monster of the Old Testament that gave the burden of the Sabbath day, that is bringing what he said he hates, which is falseness blended with his festivals. He said he hates it. As a matter of fact, he says, stop the festivals. If you're going to blend falseness with the truth, just stop. And as a matter of fact, if you take that as a concept and you read other stories through the prophets, what he says is, the people were doing the festivals of Yahweh, Leviticus 23, and the Sabbath day, but they were also worshiping these other deities. As a matter of fact, you read on in here, we don't have time to get into it, but all through here, if you read in Ezekiel 23, which I mentioned last week, it's brutal. I saw a sign on the wall the other day that somebody's shop that says, God is always good. You read Leviticus, you read Deuteronomy, you read Exodus, you read Ezekiel, Isaiah and Jeremiah, and I'd have a hard time calling him good. Now, I know he's just and fair and righteous, but I'll tell you, the slaughterings that he says he's going to do will make your skin crawl. It's like, this guy is fierce. He's a monster. Yahweh is. In fact, the devil, I've said before, the Old Testament hardly talks about the devil. But whatever devil there is would be a little pussycat compared to this tiger, this fierce, rabid tiger of Yahweh. But the point is, Yahweh says he's only that way for the people that abuse his words. You do what he says. He says, I don't even want the wicked to perish. I want the wicked man to turn to do righteousness. What's righteousness? Keeping his words. What's his word? You keep the Sabbath day of the festivals, recognizing his name, and you love your neighbor as yourself. You don't rip off your neighbor. You do mishpat and zadikah. You open your hand, you share, and you don't take your hand and grab your neighbor's stuff and run with it. With an open hand to Yahweh, saying please and thank you very much, acknowledging him as Elohim, creator of the universe, the one who sustains you. And you open your hand to your neighbor to give and to be at peace with. That's all he demands of us. But this letter Mem speaks of what's coming because of what we do with the Kaf and Lamed. If we do not regard it in the instructions, we have planted seeds, and it will be corruption and violence and distress. And I can't account for anybody else's life. 3 minutes. But if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, and if you look at what's going on these days with the weather and with the terrorist things in America and the rest of the world, it fits the description of what Yahweh says will happen if his people betray his words. But he says, if you keep my words, I will make your enemies be afraid of you. They will run at the rustling leaf instead of you running when though nobody's chasing you. He will make the weather cooperate. He will make the plants bring forth fruit. And he will make the posterity of the people of Jacob ride on the high places of the earth, the descendants of Jacob. Let me show you one other thing. What is the supreme matter on the earth? The supreme thing. Sophit. We talked about the Sophit letters. Samik, Vav, Pe. Soph. It means at the end. But it also means the pinnacle, the ultimate. If you had a resh, I'll write it in S-U-P-R. It's where we get the word super. Superman. It's also the word for a scribe who writes. Learning how to read and write has to do with a sofer. It's the supreme, it's the soprano, superlative, it's the highest. If you read this Hebrew and see how these words are put together, you will realize that what he's saying in his own words, that learning how to read and write Hebrew is the absolute highest thing there is. And if we learn how to read and write what he's saying and do it, he will raise us up to the heights of Jacob. You can say, oh, the heights of Jacob, that's kind of esoteric. If you look at the word for Yaakov, it basically means to be risen up to the third power. In geometry, you've got the XY axis, the Z axis. It means to be cubed, which is the third dimension. Abraham means pinions. It means to lift up and fly. Yitzhak means bright, clear, dazzling, brilliant, laughter. The posterity given to the descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov are to sprout wings, strengthened pinions which can fly, bright, dazzling, clear, brilliant laughter, and to be raised to the third dimension like Superman, able to leap over tall buildings in a single bound, defending Mishpat and Zadikah. Justice and righteousness, not the American way, the Hebrew way. This is Yahweh's kingdom, and the promises are there that Mem, depending on how you nurture the Kaf and Lamed in your heart, you will Mem it, and if you have this insipid, I hate this stuff, then you will Noon a rotten, vile, poisonous Zamek. Remember what Yeshua said, those who sprout forth bad fruit, I will break them off, my father the husband will break them off and burn them in the fire, and will graft on other branches. Don't think, it says in the New Testament, that if he was willing to break off the natural branches that didn't produce the fruit that he said, that he would not be willing to break off the unnatural branches. The point is, it's our nurturing of his word. And he says right here, it's not a matter of, I'm forgiven, but here's, what did Yeshua accomplish? And here's the last thing before we, up at the break here. There was a death penalty for those who high-handedly, offensively betrayed, defiled, and turned to vanity Yahweh's instructions. There was a death penalty. And until we who have done that are put to death, our record's not clear. But if Yeshua was put to death so that we could say, that was paid. It's like if a cop gives you a parking ticket and it's worth $500 and you go, I don't have $500, and somebody else walks up and says, here, I'll pay the $500. And I will pay for the towing bill, and I'll pay for the insurance claim and the lawyer fees and everything, all the other ramifications, the interest charges, I'll cover the whole thing. And you say, gee, thanks. I'm going to keep parking illegally now. Do what he said. Come into the kingdom and learn to do what he said. Now, I can't blame anybody who's never been told what the Torah instructions were, because we were told that we could come into the kingdom and we don't have to do quite frankly, a bloody thing. Mem, remember, it speaks of blood. Here, water in the blood. It has to do with the water in the blood. It has to do with being cleansed to partake in his kingdom. The mem has to do with conditioning. It has to do with preparation. If we nurture his word, conditioning it. There's one last concept here I'm going to throw out, and we're just right at the edge of being done. If we think that this thing we are nurturing is like a child that jumps out of us and lives its own life, how does that fit the pattern? If you're a mother and you have a child growing within you and it jumps out and lives its own life, becomes a teenager and runs off and has its own house, you go, oh, what's it got to do with you? How does that fit the pattern? But if what's put within us that we nurture, that becomes this life form, what if somehow that becomes us? What if somehow in this eternal dimension we take on that vehicle, that new form, to ride through the eternal realms? All of a sudden, whatever it is we put into this other thing, whatever it is we're nurturing, is not something else. It's ourself. It's something that we're responsible for. Too big of pictures to go into now, but my point is, if we regard it with our own personal interest unto eternity, then we have to look at what are we doing with these stuff he gave us. And if we were not told the truth for all these years, and if Daniel hid these words and sealed the book until now, and if now it's a chance to come back and look at these words and say, what did he really say? It's not too late for us to turn it around and for Yahweh to look at us to see our attitude about his words. And he says right there, if the wicked man turns from his wicked ways and does righteousness, he will stop what was going to come onto the wicked man, the judgment, the violence, the death. But if the righteous man does not continue in his righteousness and starts doing wickedness, none of his righteous deeds will be remembered, and he will catch hell. What I'm saying is, though that we were not told the truth, if we regard these words, it is our life, it is our health, it is to Yahweh's pleasure. This isn't for us, it's for his pleasure, but he will reward us according to the measure that we use, with the value that we give these words as we mem his kaf.